All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I have 4 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our statewide book study. We've been doing Ann Benninghoff's book on specially designed instruction. This is our final meeting. Again, I do have a couple of makeup meetings in case you missed one. Just so that you're aware, both of those meetings will be the same content. And so I did make allowance for you. I know that with spring break, I did one this week on this Thursday, the 20th, and then next Tuesday or Thursday, this Thursday, the 20th, and then the 25th, which is this following Tuesday. Hopefully that way we'll catch people on and off spring break, because I know that's a real thing. And so today, make sure that you have, if you have it with you, make sure you have your book, have something to write with and a pen, and to write on paper or something else, whether it's your tablet or your computer or something to take some notes. And if you have an IEP available that you could access, that would be really great. Again, throughout this session, we're going to be referring to a student that you've chosen, whether it's whether you can see the IEP or even if you can just take some notes on a particular student if you don't have access to an IEP. Anyway, I hope that you're enjoying this afternoon. It is snowing here in Cheyenne, much needed moisture. So hopefully you're safe and warm wherever you are. And we're going to go ahead and get started. PTSB and STARS credit, again, this is if you have read and participated in all 4 1-hour sessions and read the book. And so you can also just get a certificate of attendance if it's for yourself or for your district. And so that option will be available to you as well. And that attendance form will be provided at the end of this session today. All right, so our final part of this book is called Fulfilling the Promise of SDI. Oh, before I forget, it looked like it allowed me to check a new box that they have offered in a webinar, and we tested that out. So you are able to use the chat, and it looks like everybody can see it. So yay for that. And I think it's going to be really great as we try to make this a little more interactive as we go through this session today. So we'll try to Susan Shipley is with me today, and she's going to help try to field questions. And so we'll just make sure that we'll try to make sure we capture all those within the chat. As we get started today, I'm going to launch a poll, just like we did in the very first, well, we actually did it together on the slides, but this time I'm going to use a poll, and these will be some post questions that you had, very similar to the ones that we started out with when we started this journey together through this book study. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. Give me 1 second. And if you'll just go through here, there should be 9 questions for you to answer, and go ahead and give you some time to answer this. Let me know if you can't see the poll. I know that some of you are meeting as a group today, so definitely you can just have one person answer.
Tina Kristen can't see the poll. I don't know if she's the only one.
All right, give me a second. It says that I can get a Is Kristen on a phone? That might be why.
Cheryl, are you able to use the scroll bar on the side and scroll down to all 9 questions?
Oh, Kristen's on an iPad. Yeah, it might. I'm not sure if it will. Should allow you, but
Sounds like it's working for most people.
all right. It looks like we're starting to slow down with people's answers coming in. I'm gonna go ahead and give it about 30 more seconds and I'll end the poll and then we'll launch the results. All right, let's see what we've got here. So the first one said, our school provides differentiated instruction for all students. Is SDI still needed? Definitely the answer is yes on that one. Differentiated instruction is different than SDI, as we learned, right? Number 2, can SDI be implemented without an individualized education program? The answer is no. And we'll go through that here in just a second. And intentional decrease in pacing is likely to be adapted delivery. Looks like the majority of you said true on that. I do have a slide next. I should just wait because I have a slide to show you the answers on here. The amount of specially designed instruction is determined by staffing and or scheduling. The majority of you said false. When there is a need to adapt content, it is acceptable to lower our expectations. The majority said false on that one as well. Special education is a place where instruction occurs. The majority said false. Number 7, specially designed instruction is a restatement of the academic content standards being taught. The majority said false. HLPs, SDI, EI, and II are not the same thing. Most of you said true. And then the last one, implementation of SDI requires an IEP. And the majority said true on that. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this poll. And here are our answers. The first one is yes, SDI is still needed. And you can see down through here. Definitely special education is a service, not a place, right? And so, and let's see, what was the other one that, yeah, I'm glad that the majority of you said the amount of specially designed instruction is definitely should not be determined by our staffing and our schedules, right? It should be based on the individual needs of our students. So great job. Thank you for going through that with me. I just wanted to pull this back up. This chart can be found on page 52. If you haven't marked this in your book, I would definitely take a moment to make a note of this page. There's several pages with really good graphs, and this one is definitely one, just a good reminder of all of the steps of planning, of the planning process for SDI. And as we look at, we need to make sure first, of course, that we've clarified that learning target for the kids. And we've looked at all of those difficult things that they could face. What are those barriers for them? And then what IEP goals are going to align with what that learning target is for the day? and identify those metacognitive processes. Remember, this has to do with how can, if you can take a moment too, not just to look at how your student thinks about their learning, what it takes for them, what might be difficult for them in their processes of metacognition, but what do you do when you're faced with, when you're looking at something of how did you learn a certain method, whether it's in reading or writing or math or whatever it is, maybe it's a functional scale. How did you, what kind of thought process do you have? And it can definitely help your students along the way if you will pause for a moment and see what your metacognition is during those processes. And then, of course, your adaptations need to come into play. And then are you making sure that they can attend and access those skills? And this last one, boosting participation, we didn't go over that heavily, but I really do feel like student engagement is such a huge part of learning. And I know you know this as educators, but it's the same for us, right? If we're engaged, if we can find ways to, when we're engaged, we know that our learning increases, and it's so true for our students. And so what are different ways that we can ensure our student engagement? And as we know, sometimes that's different from one student to another. And so we have to get really creative. But I promise, as you go through these things, there are many different things that we can boost participation for all kids in our classroom. This is just a good reminder of the least restrictive environment where, is there one place that we deliver SDI? And what do you think? When we look at this continuum of a placement, where do you think we deliver SDI? Go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. Good. I'm glad to see that. You guys are saying the right thing, all of them, anywhere, right? The federal law requires students to be served in the LRE. Of course, when we look at LRE, we want to start looking in that general education classroom first. And then we see if we can, to the maximum extent appropriate, of course. And if they cannot be educated with the proper supplementary aids and services and supports, then we look at moving down that continuum, but only when we have determined as a team that that student could not be educated in that regular ed classroom with the proper supports, right? And again, yeah, SDI can be provided in any setting as it's a service rather than a location. So great job. When we look at our service minutes, this is really important for us to make a note of. Special ed services, they should be individualized and based on that child's unique needs. They should not, as you mentioned before in the poll, they should not be determined by the bell schedule, by that teacher availability, and it definitely should not always just be the exact same as any other child's IEP because that's when we've scheduled it, or because they have a similar diagnosis. So we need to make sure that it is definitely individualized. Minutes should not be based on programming, just because that's what we do in our school or our building or our district. And so just be aware of that. As we look at this last part in the book, it was about implementing and assessing and fulfilling the promises that we're making of SDI, right? And so part of that is planning and being flexible. We know that there are we make many plans as we go through, and we should plan, but we also need to remember to be flexible. We know that it starts out with that baseline data. If we don't have that baseline and those present levels, how do we know where our starting point is for that student? And so we need to make very sure that we've done a good job of comprehensive evaluations and making sure that we have our baseline data and that it's clear. We know we need to collect data. you know, all of the formative, summative, and observation data. We need to make sure we have our roles down. Who's doing the collecting? Who's responsible for monitoring? Who's responsible for analyzing and making adjustments to that program for the child? And then who and what are we doing with our data analysis? Are we just looking at it? We're going to talk about that a little bit later in today's session. I love this quote. If a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. I do believe that, you know, especially as special educators, we do this all the time, right? We're taking a look at our children are not able to learn the same way, or they would have no need for special education. And so as a SPED teacher, I already know that you are great at pivoting. When you have a clear vision of the outcome, you can find ways to overcome those bumps on the road. But what are those barriers? Do you know what the barriers are? Or do we just look at it as a blanket approach? Maybe while doing a formative assessment, you realize that a student needs a lot more modeling or practice. What do? Do you keep going because everybody is waiting for you to continue the lesson, or do you find time and a way to stop and redirect and reteach? You know, we need to recognize that we can all have the best plan, but it doesn't always work for all students in all situations. We need to be reminded that we should meet our students where they're at. And what strategies do you use to remain flexible, ready and willing to pivot and change your plans if necessary? Do you kind of have a plan in your mind of what do? You know, how do you pause and take a moment to make those necessary changes? Do you just make notes as you're going along? Do you, you know, actually stop and ensure that maybe if one child isn't getting it, are we ensuring that all of them, just because it's evident that one child isn't getting it, it may not be as evident for others that they're not getting that part of the lesson as well. So, you know, we do need to make sure that we're taking note of, you know, making sure to stop and do little assessments along the way during your lesson. Yeah, SDI is definitely more than just test scores. This is a quote on page 135. It is about providing students with the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that they need in order to experience a yearning for lifelong learning. That is definitely true. I know too often we do have to assess, right? It's the way we know, but there's many ways that we can assess. And so, and we'll go over a few of those ways. Yeah, Susan, I love what you said. Determining whether or not something is necessary or not is up to the IEP team. Opinions may vary by people from the outside looking in. It can be helpful or harmful, depending on the level of support given. Very true. I'm glad you brought that point up.
Well, that was in response. There was a question, and I think somebody took it down, about whether one-on-one support will hinder, if it's unnecessary, does that hinder somebody in the LRE?
Oh,
and so
yeah.
it's very much a it depends kind of question.
It is, and it depends, but yeah, good point. When we're looking at, look at this chart here, and we've talked about present levels and making sure that we know our students' needs based on those present levels, right? And then you see that it moves into specially designed instruction during intervention, and then data collection, progress monitoring, our goals and accommodations. And I love that they included accommodations in this, because there are many times that when we're looking at these, you know, are our accommodations appropriate? Are we providing too many accommodations or not enough accommodations? You know, we talk about learned helplessness a lot in special education, and we definitely don't want to be pushing students towards learned helplessness. We want to push them towards independence. And so as we go through here and you're looking at your IEP, you're looking at the programming that you and the team have put together for this student, you know, there are times when it may have been appropriate at that moment, but maybe, you know, a month, 6 months, 8 months down the road, it may not be appropriate anymore. So we're constantly taking a look at this, right? Just because we have an annual IEP, you know, maybe on March 19th, tomorrow, and we're looking at present levels, it doesn't mean that's the only time we look at their level, their present levels. We're constantly doing this, right? So as we talk about, let's talk about just the specially designed instruction piece of this at first. When we look at this chart and we're looking at our academic knowledge and skills, this is where a lot of times our mind goes to, of course, first, because we're trying to ensure that our students are able to access our grade level standards, right? But SDI is not the delivery of academic standards. This is general education, right? So accessing and the delivery of those academic standards, that's done within the general education realm. But SDI, you know, when we're looking at a student who might be struggling in history, but we, you know, we look at this and the IEP team has determined that actually they may be struggling in history, but the skill deficit is in reading comprehension or decoding or something like that. And that was actually the barrier to that grade level material, which would make sense if they're also struggling in science, maybe even math with those word problems, depending on what level math they're in. So the SDI is planned and implemented around reading comprehension for this child, right? Because if they've determined that that's really where that breakdown and that skill gap or that deficit is happening, that's where the SDI should be focused, right? So I want you to just take a moment, pull up your IEP, and I want you to take a look at the present levels. I want you to take a look at the goals and the SDI that's planned for this what program is planned for this child. Is there anything missing? Are we addressing the skill gaps, or are we just saying, you know, it's going to be in reading 3 times a week, you know, or 30 minutes for 5 times a week? Are we just doing that every time and then not looking at those skill gaps? What is reading is very large. Is it in decoding? Is it in fluency? Is it in comprehension? What is that skill gap? And it could be all, right? But are we identifying those barriers? What is the skill gap? So I'm going to give you a few minutes. Let's see. How about 3 minutes? I'll give you 3 minutes to take a look at your IEP. If you don't have an IEP today, just make some mental notes or take some actual notes and take a look at these questions here. What skill deficit or barriers keeping that student from accessing the curriculum? And then what skills, knowledge, or strategies does a student need to be taught in order to address those things, right? And ensure access and progress. So take a few minutes and make some notes about your IEP. Okay, if you could give me a thumbs up if you feel like we're ready to move on. Perfect. I hope that you're using this moment just to take some notes. As you know, we don't make unilateral decisions. We do it as an IEP team. However, it is important to every once in a while take these moments to take notes about these things. Some things might need an amendment and some things might just need some slight adjustments. So, make sure that whatever you're determining today, you're discussing this with your IEP team if you feel that there needs to be some changes made. Okay, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to take a look at functional skills. Um, these functional skills are just as important as those academic skills, and many times our functional skills can be a major barrier or deficit to not allowing access to our curriculum, right? And so both functional and academic skills need to be addressed to access the curriculum. If we know that a student is struggling, say with executive functioning skills of organization, maybe task initiation and time management, would you be surprised to know that maybe they're struggling to write an essay in English or to complete their DBQ in history? I wouldn't be surprised if they were struggling, if they had those issues with their executive functions. One common accommodation to support students in writing essays is it's usually what? A graphic organizer, right? But if we simply hand that student a graphic organizer and we just hand it over and say, here you go, here's something to help you with writing your essay, that is only offering an accommodation. That is not SDI. Will you take just a second and put in the chat, what would SDI look like to ensure that your student has appropriate skills and knowledge to use that accommodation, to use a graphic organizer? What could you do for SDI? Take a second, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in the chat. I'm sure many of you have provided SDI for a graphic organizer. Yeah, explicit instruction on how, and I know that there are many different graphic organizers, so it's going to depend, right? A lot of depends in special ed. Yeah, I love this. Plan with your general ed teacher on how to use that specific graphic organizer and teach them. Model, right? Like break it down into steps. I love it. Yeah. Oh, help students design their own graphic organizers for types of writing. Yeah, I think many times, just because we have one that works for us, it may not work for our students. So I love that idea. Yes. Word banks definitely work. Maybe, some students need help with starting, right? Maybe they have a hard time, like this student that I talked about has task initiation issues, right? Yeah, I love those comments. Thank you guys very much. So take another a couple of minutes and just look at your IEP. Are there things that were missed, when you look at present levels and you start realizing, have we looked at all of these areas of functional skill? Because maybe we definitely know that behavior is a barrier to accessing our academic curriculum, right? And so, but just as much as behaviors, if those executive functioning, maybe behaviors are being caused because of some of these things that they are also missing. And so I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to scan through and see, are there any functional skills that haven't been addressed in your IEP? Okay, I know it probably didn't take you quite as long since you've already scanned that PLAF the first time, but just keep in mind if there are things, or maybe hopefully this might spur some ideas for you to how to design your SDI based on functional skills as well. All right, when we talk about progress monitoring, we already have we already have the goals, we already have our SDI planned. Now we're taking a look and we're looking at those goals, and we're providing SDI, and we're progress monitoring all along the way, right? And so this is just a good reminder of that monitoring cycle that we usually go through. And then, of course, as we're reflecting on that and we're looking at those results, if something isn't working, I hope that we're looking to see, what do we need to change? Is it frequency, duration? Is it, sometimes we are too quick to change the program instead of taking a look to see, are we doing it with fidelity? Are we making sure that all those other pieces are in place? So I think it's just a good reminder as we go through looking at our progress monitoring data, which brings us to data. So let's talk about data collection. I love this slide and this quote: without data, all we have is an opinion. And it's true. Unless we have actual data, it's just what we think, right? So make sure you have a clear purpose. Before you start collecting data, make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you want to learn and how you're going to use that data. This is going to help you focus your efforts and ensure that the data you do collect is relevant and meaningful. Don't use multiple sources. Don't just rely on one type of data to inform your instruction. We want to look at all kinds of data before making sure that we're, that it is informing our instruction. We're going to use a variety of sources, such as observation, assessment, self-reporting, just to get a more complete picture of your students' needs and their progress, right? But also keep it simple. Try not to collect too much data at once. Focus on collecting the most important and relevant information, and look for those ways to streamline your data collection process to make it more efficient. Keep it consistent. Make sure that you're collecting data in a manner that you're using the same methods and tools over time, because if we're jumping around too much, it's not going to be effective data, right? We're not gathering the same information. And also, it's going to help make sure that you're identifying those patterns and trends in your students. And then definitely make sure we're using technology wisely. Technology can be a really great tool for data collecting, but we need to make sure that we're using it not just consistently, but accurately. So some of those key data points, they may include, of course, our academics. Are we taking data on accommodations like we talked about earlier? Are we taking a look at those to see, are the accommodations working? Or are we just plugging in and check boxes for accommodations for all of our students? Are we making sure that they are the appropriate accommodations for that student? Are we taking data on attendance? If a student is continuously missing class, that's a problem, right? They can't be learning if they're not in the classroom. However, are we taking a look to see what patterns are based around their attendance? What's going on? It gives us some data to go back and take a look. Attendance is a strong data point that we definitely should be looking at. And of course, behavior. We know it's easy to think, of course, we're going to take data on behavior. We have our ABC charts. We have, all these different ways of collecting data on behavior. But, we need to make sure that, again, whatever we're doing, that we have, who's collecting, how are we collecting, what are we doing with that data? Executive functioning. Are we taking data on that? Think about those functional skills of your students, and what are we doing to address those needs more effectively? I do believe if we look at our data and our trends and our patterns for those things, it's going to make it easier for us as a team to take a look at those and what what the needs of that child is. The progress on IEP goals, of course, social emotional, and then the physical needs of our students. What data are we taking on that for whether it's mobility or, whatever those physical needs might be. Dr. Bailey just recently did a 3-part series on SDI, and later in the session, you'll get a link to the Wyoming Instructional Network that will have, you'll have access to that 3-part series. And all the handouts that were wonderful. Some of those handouts I actually shared throughout this book study. They were just wonderful and they are so helpful. But during that, she even brought up like toileting needs. As we know, we can't just have something and make sure that if we're trying to help a child increase their independence with their toileting needs, we don't just do that one time a day. But each time those data points may, change throughout the day or the week or the month. And so we need to make sure that we are taking that accurate data on all these pieces. So different kinds of methods. Of course, this is not an all-encompassing list, but probably the most common. When we look at anecdotal notes, which are just written observation of the student behavior and their interactions with others, and then we look at frequency, recording how many times that specific behavior occurs within that time period. Maybe, during the 5 minutes that Mary was waiting for the principal, she cursed at me 4 times. We need it to be specific and not just, during this, she cussed at me a lot. Well, that doesn't help us in, collecting accurate data, right? We need to have it. How long did it happen? What happened? And then how many times, right? For frequency. Interval, observing and recording behavior during, specific time intervals. Duration, recording, tracking how long a behavior lasts. Like it took Sal 6 minutes to line up to leave the library when asked to do so. We can measure that, right? We can see that maybe tomorrow it only took Sal 3 minutes to line up. Checklists are a good way, marking off those specific behaviors or skills as they are observed. That is important to note, as they are observed. There's a little part in the slide coming up, when we talk about, we don't always have great memories, especially if it's something that is an extensive behavior. We think we remember exactly, but we don't always remember exactly. So make sure that we are taking data as it occurs, right? And then, of course, test scores, assessments, data sheets. They're just structured forms like an ABC chart, right? We're gonna record on something that's already designed for us to take those specific data points and observation narratives. So why is data collection important? I think we all know this as special educators, but it definitely allows us to determine that student's current levels of skill, behavior, or achievement. It allows us to determine if the intervention we implement is successful. And how will we know if an academic gap is closing or a challenging behavior is decreasing unless we have measured it initially, right? We have to have some baseline. We have to have some of those important pieces in our data. So, and it also allows us to determine if the intervention requires changes or modifications. Like we said, as we know, the definition of insanity is to continue to do something that we know isn't working, right? And just over and over again. And so why would we ever do that in our students' programming if we're seeing that it's not working and we just continue to keep trying? Obviously, we're going to give it some time, right? We're not going to, if it didn't work one day, we're going to change it immediately. No, but we are going to start making some note of what didn't work and why maybe that day. It could have been simply that child came to school and didn't have breakfast, or dinner the night before. And so, we need to also, make sure that we definitely need to remember that data is great, but we're taking data on real children in real circumstances, and and they have real things going on in their lives as well. So I do love this reminder, just that data needs to be taken in real time. Just like the other one said, we're not good reporters. We don't remember exact details when we're trying to go back later. So example, when we're taking data on behavior, it's very important to put down what is seen or heard and to avoid anything that's stigmatized by personal perceptions of an individual or specific behavior. Sometimes, we just assume that, and we just already anticipate that maybe little Johnny, he does this all the time, so I know he's gonna, do it in this situation. And so we're already setting them up. We're already putting that stigma on there. And making sure that objective observation means watching those events without being affected by personal biases, prejudices, and watching what's happening without guessing at the reasons that caused the action. At that point, you're just taking the data, just the facts, right? You're watching the activity without judging whether it's good or bad, and producing an objective record that states exactly what an observer sees and hears. Again, don't let our emotions and our feelings get in the way when we're trying to take this kind of data. It's most effective when it's summarized regularly and reviewed weekly to determine if the student is making progress or if something needs to be changed. So many teachers will summarize the data for the progress report, but if a student isn't making progress, letting 9 weeks or even 4.5 weeks for interims go by without fixing it means you've lost a quarter of the year of teaching. We do not want to wait until we get to those progress reports to think, oh yeah, I guess that really didn't work. We need to be making those notes along and seeing what we need to do along the way, not waiting till that next progress reporting session. Many times, you see that we've seen, in IEPs where you wait till the end and then, it's too late. They've gone through their entire year, not just a quarter of the year. So be really mindful of when and how often to look at that data. I don't know if you can see this cartoon, but it says, get all the information you can. We'll think of a way, of a use for it later, of a way to use it later. And I think sometimes do we do that? Do we just think we have to gather all this data? And so we just continue to do all of these things and get, too much data, and it really doesn't mean anything. So really, why take data if you're not going to use it, right? Data is taken for a variety of reasons, but data that is taken and put in a notebook never to be seen again is just paperwork. So do you have the proper tools? Do you know what you should use to collect data? How do you organize and store your data? Do you have a set time to review the data individually and with your teams? And then do you know how to summarize and analyze data in order to make informed instructional decisions for each of your students? And then when you get ready and you've got all of this analyzed and summarized, how does your team plan what to do next? What is your plan? What is your action plan? And then how do you share that? And I do want you to put in the chat this last question. How do you engage your students in their own data? I think that is really important. So how do you engage your students in their own data? Good. I see binders, student binders. They track their own, they graph their own weekly meetings. You use it as a teaching tool. That's great. I love that you guys can use the chat. This is really nice, and that you can all see. Yeah, good job. I think it's really important that I've seen some really powerful movement in some of my kids when I was in the classroom, when they were involved in taking a look at their data and their growth. Yeah, sometimes they stagnated, but it gave, for many of them, it gave them that extra push that they needed to see, how well they could do. And, there's definitely ways if a student is continually struggling and they're going to have behaviors around it, there's ways to get around it. I know that there's many creative ways, but I think if we engage them in their own data, 9 times out of 10, it's going to actually push them to want to do better. So this quote I love as well. Data will talk to you if you're willing to listen to it. And so I just wanted, it's just another reminder. What is it saying? And it's kind of just restating some of those questions that I just asked. I do want you to turn to page 138 in your book. When you're analyzing data, these questions I felt like were really helpful. Did they respond differently in different settings, different providers? Like we talked about in one of those previous sessions, are you poking the bear? Are you the one holding the stick? Is it a paraprofessional? Is it another teacher? Is it, these certain students that they shouldn't be grouped with? What are we doing? Are we looking at this data and actually providing, doing something? And, again, before moving too quickly to change the intervention, take note if the intervention is being implemented with fidelity. Do we need to change frequency, duration, intensity, location, all of those different things that might affect that intervention before we just change the whole entire program. Okay. This was a really cool quote that I felt like Anne included in the book on page 144. It says, for SDI to become a glowing, energy-producing component of your service continuum, you must begin by establishing a vision and then develop a plan for gathering resources, fanning the first flame, stoking and fueling, and shoring up special education practices. I love this visual because we're actually moving into, we're getting closer to summer and we're going to be able to roast some marshmallows outside over this campfire. So think about when you're building a campfire and you're trying to set it up to make that perfect marshmallow, however you like yours, right? But if you're thinking about how to set it up, getting that perfect marshmallow, think about what we're doing. How are we setting ourselves up for success to teach SDI, to have the appropriate SDI, to ensure that our students are making progress? There's some coaching questions on pages 144 and 145, and it moves into a section for leaders. And I love that she included this, but I really feel like I don't want you to turn off if you're not an administrator, because I feel like this whole section on, when she's talking to the leaders really is for anyone, because as you go through some of those questions, I think they're good questions to ask ourselves as educators. And whether you're a coach, whether you're an administrator, whether you're an educator or service provider, they're going to be really helpful for you to pause and think about those questions. Again, it's 144 or 154 and 155. I'm just going to go through some of these slides quickly. Really, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information. When we talk about intervention and ways to track and ways to help with our teams, I know that many of you were involved in doing DBI. And so it's intended to help that small subgroup of students if they're not making adequate progress in their current intervention, if they're not meeting individualized goals, and they have persistently low academic achievement or have high intensity and frequency of behaviors. Many times DBI can be really helpful. And so anyway, I just gave you some links here so that it can be a reminder if you haven't been involved in that process and others have in your school or district. I would definitely have you get with them and see if maybe that could be a help to you as well. All right, this is a video. Let me see if I can make sure it's backed up all the way. Here we go.
What we know about students with disabilities, even kids with the most intensive cognitive challenges, is that they can all make progress. All students can learn and can make improvement from where they are starting. And so this approach and this focus on intensive intervention is really about helping move the bar for kids to the extent that we can. Students with disabilities on the whole have really had very flat achievement when we look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Proficiency rates for students overall hover around 30%, and that number has gone up over these last 15 years. Whereas when we look at students with disabilities, at 4th and 8th grade in reading and math, the proficiency rates hover around 10%. As these students get older and we start looking at things like graduation, post-secondary outcomes, incarceration rates, and so on, also the numbers are much more dismal. And there has been more recently a focus on making sure all students make progress towards standards, and so I think sometimes that gets interpreted to mean we have to teach all students the same way because we have to get them to the same place. There is no such thing as an acceptable failure rate, and that this is a group of kids where we need to continue to look at data and individualize our instruction so that we can get these students closer to where we want them to be, and so that their performance is more in line with that of their peers. What we know about.
All right. I love that video. It's a great reminder that at whatever level you are teaching at currently, you are impacting those students clear through to their post-secondary goals. And so what you do matters. And as we listen to those statistics, we know that it can feel dismal at times, but if we continue to make sure that we are doing our parts and we're doing all the things that we can do to help improve our students' progress, we're going to raise that bar. And so it is possible. And I think as it starts with having those great relationships with our students and letting them know that we believe in them and that they need to believe in themselves, there's all those factors that play. But anyway, I thank you for wherever you are in your level of teaching, at whatever grade level, what you do it matters to all of those kids. So thank you. I bring up I just want to, again, share a few of these slides that talks about PLC teams, and you're going to see different things called different things, whether it's professional learning communities or whatever it's called. We really kind of have the same idea, right? Many times as special educators, we meet with our grade level teachers. If you're in elementary school, if you're in secondary, you're going to meet with your content level teachers, whatever you're supporting. But as we go through this, I want you to think about, we're looking at using the data, right? And we're planning common assessments, and then we're looking at those strategies. We're looking at assessments again, we're responding to those, hopefully, right? So just take a look at this cycle as we go through some of these pieces. Regardless of what it is, how your team works, it should be collaborative. It should be action oriented. You should focus on continuous improvement. It definitely should be results driven, and focus on student learning. So all of those factors, regardless of where you're at in your cycle of PLC, those 5 things should be part of your PLC. There's another one of they call them learning teams in this, and there's a book called Becoming a Learning Team. And whatever your district does, I liked this graphic talking about making sure that we're seeing these 5 stages, and it supports collaborative engagement between teams of teachers and other educators to support student learning. And that's the key right there, right? We need that collaborative engagement between our grade level teachers and other educators and within the IEP team as well. We're analyzing data. We're examining that student and educator learning challenges maybe part of that is that the teacher has some challenges that she needs to overcome as well, right? We're setting goals. We're learning individually and collaboratively. And we are implementing our new learning. And then we also want to make sure that we're monitoring, assessing, and adjusting our own practice. Like we said, not just our SDI, but all of those factors. And the key is that we're making informed and intentional instructional decisions for each of our students. So as we look at these key questions, I love that. Like first of all, we start with what do we want students to learn? How will we know when they've learned it? What will we do if they didn't learn it? And what will we do if they already know it? So, there's all of these different factors that come into play. And if we're doing a good job of collaborating with our grade level teams, we're gonna have answers to all of these questions. So the question I want to ask you today, whether your team calls it a PLC, learning team, or another name, they involve a continuous process of data analysis, goal setting, collaborative learning, implementation of new practices, and reflection to improve teaching and student outcomes. So my question today, is your team on target? And I also was just wondering, what teams do you meet with? Typically, our buildings give us PLC time to meet with our grade level teachers. Do you have time to meet with other SPED teachers? I know many times SPED teachers can be on an island. Sometimes you may be the only SPED teacher in the building. You may be, maybe you have one in primary, one in the intermediate part of an elementary school, but many times in an elementary, you're alone, you're on an island. So what are you doing to help collaborate with other SPED teachers to get other ideas? What about your paras, your paraprofessionals? I know when I was teaching, it became evident that, we needed some PLC time with our paras. They are out there doing so much with our students. There are times that they see our students in the classrooms more than the teacher does, the SPED teacher does at times. And so what are we doing to collaborate with them and to ensure that they have the supports that they need as well? And as we end today, I just want to talk to you about what is your vision about SDI, and does it need to be polished? Do I really believe that all means all? Do I have high expectations for all my students in academics, behaviors, socially? And so, when we take a look at this, just take note of where you feel like you are at this point. Susan, was there something?
You can finish the thought. It's more about credits and
Okay.
makeup sessions. I have
Okay,
two questions.
I'm gonna get there. Yep.
Yep.
So if you could, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I'd really love to know. These were the 3 parts of our book. We started off with envisioning SDI. What does it even look like, right? What should it look like? How do we plan? And then fulfilling that promise of SDI. I would really love to know any aha moments. Was there something that you learned that maybe you realized, oh man, I need to do that different, right? Maybe it's about planning, maybe it's teaming or the implementation of SDI. I know that there were things when I first read this book, I had many aha moments. So I'm hoping you had some. Yeah. I see many just learning more, wanting to know more. Oh, Leslie, you're not a SPED teacher, so she did not know what SDI was. So I'm grateful that you're here. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes we take a look and we realize, oh, maybe I don't have enough in the PLAF. Right? If some of those things weren't in the PLAF when you took a look at your IEP, that might be a key there, right? All right. Well, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your time and you being here to participate during this whole book study. I have really thoroughly enjoyed learning alongside you. And don't forget to check out our other resources. It's located here. The links are at the bottom of this screen. And I've put them in your emails, and I'll send it again in your follow-up email. This is to the Wyoming Instructional Network. The first link that you have here is going to be a direct link. It's on the front page of our special ed professional development resources, and it will have the book study, and it also still has Dr. Bailey's 3-part series on SDI. The second link that you see here, if you scroll to the bottom of that first one, it actually says other special education resources. Click on that. It'll take you to a ton of different topics that we have available in past training. And so make sure that you go there. There's all kind of topics for behavior and many others. So what's next? If you missed any of the sessions and you're looking for credit, if you're not looking for credit, you do not need to come to the makeup session unless you just want to come join us. But if you're looking for credit, you're going to need, if you missed a session, you'll need to attend one of these days. Again, the content's going to be the same. I'm just giving you 2 different opportunities. And then right now, just to give you a disclaimer, PTSB, their website is currently under construction, and they are not accepting any applications or credit information. So we can either give you a certificate of attendance for all the times you've been, and you can submit it yourself, or if you want us to submit it, it'll just be when they get their site up and we can actually submit that for you. So in the attendance form today that I'm going to post right here, and I'll put it in the link or in the chat for you as well. So make sure that you fill out this form completely and let us know what you prefer. And then there's also a QR code. I know that for some it worked with your phone, sometimes it didn't. So I just put the link in there for you to use as well. Whoops. That's interesting. It didn't take the last part. Let me try that again.
So Dina, just to confirm, if you haven't missed a session, you're done. You don't have anything to make up.
That's right.
And then what happens if somebody was not able to make the QR code for attendance work in the past?
Just email me and I'll put my email in the chat right here. I know I've had some people say that they couldn't get it to work for some reason. And so if that's the case, you know, sometimes I just need to send it in an email and it'll work for you. I'm not sure why, but anyway, yes, if it's not working and you want credit, and just so you know, like sometimes people will want just a certificate of attendance for their own records. Maybe your district is wanting to know that you were here today. So we can definitely send out an email with a certificate of attendance for you.
So the link in the chat is not working.
Okay, well then
But the
I will
QR
definitely be sending it in a follow-up email then. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me see if I can do this. Try that. You guys, will somebody try that one and see if it works?
Yes, it works.
Yay, good. Okay, sorry about that. Let's try that. No, so the first session, what I did is I didn't cancel it, I just moved it. So when I ended up, when my grandbaby was born, I just moved the date. And so we've now had all 4 sessions. So if you were able to attend all 4 sessions, you do not need to attend, but you know, the makeup session. But if you happen to miss a session because I had to reschedule one of those, I provided 2 opportunities for you to make that up. Thank you, Travis. I'm going to be also sending out some information. I missed putting it on this slide, but we are going to be having a conference this year, and it will be July 30th and 31st. We are hoping to have it in Cheyenne, and it is going to be an intensive workshop on SDI with Dr. Tessie Bailey and Christine Manning. That will, I promise, you will not be sorry that you attended that. It will be amazing. So more information to come on that. Watch for registration. And I will put all that information in the follow-up email as well. Thank you guys. I'm going to hold on here just for a second in case you need. Let me repost that link in there. It sounded like some of you might need it again. I didn't see that we had like questions through there. Did you, Susan?
No, I don't.